You ever notice how, in a group conversation, there's always one person who barely says anything? They're not on their phone. They're not bored. They're just watching. Maybe that person is you. You're sitting there, nodding at the right moments, smiling when everyone else laughs, storing little details away. You leave the room knowing exactly who was uncomfortable, who was pretending to listen, and who subtly shifted sides halfway through the conversation. Meanwhile, someone else walks out saying, "That was fun," with absolutely no idea what actually happened. And here's the strange part. People often assume the quiet observer is shy, insecure, or disengaged. But that assumption misses something important. Because when you observe more than you speak, something specific starts happening inside your mind. Subtle shifts, quiet advantages, a few hidden costs too. And depending on why you're observing instead of talking, the psychology behind it can be very different. So let's talk about what's really going on when someone listens more than they speak. And if this already feels a little too familiar, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because we're about to uncover patterns that most people never stop to notice. First, there's the quiet scanner. This is the person who walks into a room and immediately starts mapping it, not consciously, but instinctively. Who's dominant here? Who's nervous? Who's trying too hard to be liked? You might be leaning back in your chair, arms relaxed, eyes moving more than your mouth. Someone tells a joke, and you don't laugh right away, not because it's not funny, but because you're watching who laughs first. This type observes because their brain is tuned for pattern recognition. Psychologically, this often comes from growing up in environments where reading the room mattered. Maybe emotions were unpredictable. Maybe authority figures changed moods quickly. Or maybe being observant was rewarded more than being expressive. So instead of reacting outwardly, you learned to react inwardly. You pick up on micro expressions, tone shifts, the way someone avoids eye contact for half a second too long. And over time, this builds a kind of social intuition that other people don't even realize exists. The upside? You're rarely blindsided socially. The downside? You can feel like you're always on, even when you're quiet. And if this is you, you might recognize the feeling of being mentally tired after social events, despite barely saying a word. Then there's the internal processor. This person isn't quiet because they don't have thoughts. They're quiet because their thoughts arrive late. Or rather, they arrive fully formed after a long internal conversation. You know the feeling. Someone asks a question. Everyone else answers immediately. You pause. By the time you're ready to speak, the topic has already moved on. Later that night, lying in bed, your brain goes, "Oh, that's what I should have said." This type observes because their mind prefers depth over speed. Psychologically, this often happens when someone values precision. You don't want to say something half true or poorly phrased. You want it to be right. And that internal filter slows everything down. So instead of jumping in, you listen, you refine, you replay, you consider angles no one else is considering. The irony is that people might mistake your silence for lack of engagement, when in reality, you're engaged on a much deeper level. If this resonates, you probably hate being interrupted. Not because it's rude, but because it breaks the internal process you were carefully building. Another type is the social minimalist. This person speaks less not because they can't speak, but because they choose not to. They've learned, often the hard way, that words cost energy. And they're selective about where that energy goes. You might notice this in someone who used to talk more, but doesn't anymore. They've seen conversations loop. They've watched the same arguments repeat. They've realized that not every thought needs to be externalized, so they observe. Psychologically, this often comes from social fatigue. Maybe you've spent years explaining yourself, defending your preferences, softening your words so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Eventually, your brain decides silence is simpler. This isn't emotional withdrawal. It's emotional efficiency. You'll still speak when it matters, but you're no longer interested in filling space just to prove you belong in it. If this is you, you probably feel strangely peaceful when you don't talk for long stretches, and slightly irritated when people force conversation just to avoid silence. Then there's the emotional protector. This type observes more than they speak because speaking feels risky. Every time you talk, you reveal something, an opinion, a value, a vulnerability. And maybe, at some point, that openness backfired. You were misunderstood, dismissed, mocked, or subtly punished for being honest. So now, you watch first. You listen to how others respond before deciding whether it's safe to contribute. You test the emotional temperature of the room. You might even let others speak for you, knowing you agree but choosing not to expose yourself. Psychologically, this is a defense strategy, not a flaw. Your nervous system learned that observation equals safety. Silence equals control. The cost is that people may never fully know you, but the benefit is that you stay regulated, grounded, protected. If this feels familiar, you might notice that you open up deeply with just one or two people and stay nearly invisible everywhere else. But here's the twist. Observing more than you speak doesn't just change how others see you. It changes how you experience reality. When you talk less, you hear more. When you hear more, you notice contradictions, inconsistencies, performances. You start to see the gap between what people say and what they actually mean. And that awareness can be both empowering and isolating, because once you see it, it's hard to unsee. You might feel like conversations are predictable, like social rituals are slightly scripted, like everyone's playing a role, and you're the one watching from the audience instead of the stage. That doesn't make you better, but it does make you different. And the real psychological shift happens when you realize this. Silence isn't emptiness. It's space. Space to think, space to feel, space to choose when your voice actually matters. So if you're someone who observes more than you speak, the question isn't, why am I like this? The better question is, what has my silence been teaching me? Have you learned how people reveal themselves when they're not being watched? Have you learned when to speak and when not to? Have you learned that presence doesn't require performance? Or maybe you're starting to wonder if it's time to balance observation with expression, to let some of those internal thoughts finally take shape in the world. There's no single right way to be. Some people change rooms by talking. Others change them by noticing. So which one are you? And more importantly, what do you do with what you see? If this felt a little too familiar, you're not alone. And if you want to keep exploring the quiet psychology behind everyday behavior, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. You'll know exactly why you're here.